Good afternoon. I'm Randy Horton, Chief Solutions Officer for Orthogonal. Thank you for logging in today to join us for this webinar. We know you have busy schedules, and we appreciate you taking the next hour or so to discuss with us beyond the device, where digital ecosystems are creating real value in MedTech. As many of you know, Orthogonal organizes a webinar around once a month, and we invite in industry experts from medical device manufacturers and other companies. Today is no exception of having a real expert in here who we'll introduce shortly. Uh, Two very quick things before we get going. First, as we say every time, we do value your brutally candid feedback on webinars. It's really, you are our single most important data source in terms of what can we do differently? What should we do new? What should we not do again? So if we reach out to you, please pick up the phone or answer your email. We'd love to hear feedback. Second, and not obviously, we've been told we should actually just say a minute about who we are and what we do so people aren't left wondering. So I'm going to introduce briefly our CEO, Bernhard Kappo, who's going to share just a minute or two about Orthogonal and what we do to give you some context for why we are doing this webinar. Bernhard, over to you.
All right, thanks everyone. Let me see if I can work the technology to do a slideshow. Okay, so really quick about Orthogonal. We are all about improving patient outcomes faster. Lots of people are about improving patient outcomes, but we really do this by applying fast feedback loops, best practices to quality processes for SAMD and connected device ecosystems. So we're all about building better processes, tools, and patterns and applying those to help our customers launch and evolve their SAMD and connected device ecosystems with greater safety, regulatory compliance, engagement, and effectiveness. We work across the spectrum, mobile, cloud, web, lots of AI, ML, both in the device and agentic AI throughout the SDLC. A lot of expertise in Bluetooth, and we do all of our work in our ISO 1345 certified quality management system. We are a trusted partner in SAMD and digital ecosystems development. We've been doing this for 15 plus years, and about 10 of those years, we have also been partnering with our clients to help them build out their internal SAMD capabilities. So we'll do both turnkey development, but then working together with folks so that they can continue to move faster and build out their ecosystems. And as part of what we do, we also are working on shaping the future of regulations and standards and guidance, doing lots of work around cloud. There should be a new AMI-TIR guidance document coming out some point this year. We're also doing work in BYOD and risk management for AI. Work with a lot of different folks across the spectrum, both venture-backed startups, a lot of enterprise medical device companies, pharma folks that have SAMD and device as part of what they're doing, and then tech and consumer firms like Google and Oura and Meta who have work in SAMD and connected devices. We work with folks in a few different ways. We'll build things, we'll co-build together, and then we'll enable them to move faster. Kind of the way we think about this is there's a sweet spot where you are combining modern software development practices with the right way of approaching regulatory and quality. If you can combine those things together the way we have and we teach our customers to do, you can be about 2 to 3 times as efficient. So moving faster and getting a lot more done out of the teams that you have. So if this is of interest to your folks, happy to have a conversation. Just share the things we've learned, and if there's a way we can partner, we'd love to hear about it.
Excellent. So I'd like to introduce our guest panelist here today, Kelly Watson from Tidepool. Kelly, I believe you lead product and user experience. Is that
I
correct?
do. I'm our Chief Product Officer here at Tidepool.
Excellent. So maybe just introduce yourself personally first, a little about you and your background, and then we'll talk a little bit about Tidepool and why you all are so relevant to a discussion about digital ecosystems in medtech.
Absolutely. It's wonderful to be here with you all. We love the Orthogonal team and love talking about device ecosystems. I'm Kelly Watson. I'm our Chief Product Officer at Tidepool. I started my career off in bench research at FDA before moving to NIH and then into product design, and then met my now husband who lives with type 1 diabetes. And so when really trying to understand that condition and the ways that we want to improve both of our lives together. Met our wonderful founders at Tidepool, Brandon Arbiter and Howard Luck, and started at Tidepool about 9 years ago now. It's been a forever, but it's been a joy to be working on technologies that support both the clinician and the patient, those that live with all different types of diabetes. So happy to talk a little bit about Tidepool and the broader ecosystem. All of our product lines are essentially large ecosystems that bring in connected device data and make it accessible, actionable, and meaningful. So glad to talk about that today.
Great, great. So tell us a little bit about Tidepool for those who don't know you all in terms of how you address the diabetes space, and also a little bit about your company background because it is an unusual story for medtech. Fascinating, but unusual.
Yeah, I mean, first thing that's fascinating, we are nonprofit. So we're a nonprofit that builds software as a medical device. And I think there's kind of an interesting origin story there. Howard Look, our former CEO, he stepped down due to health challenges last year, but he was VP of engineering at Amazon at the time when his daughter was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And she was seen by the best endocrinologist here in the Bay Area at Stanford and was on the best technology. She was on at the time, what was a really fabulous insulin pump from Medtronic and a fabulous CGM technology from the manufacturer Dexcom. And Howard would go into endocrinology appointments at Stanford with these clinicians and realize that these two manufacturers had protocols that would not allow one another to talk to each other, not close the loop. But even more than that, clinicians would print reports, so print actual PDF reports from one manufacturer where you see glucose data, and then another manufacturer where you see insulin data, and have to take these pieces of paper and hold them up to the light in order to see glucose data, which is incredibly important in understanding how insulin needs to be dosed and titrated and changed. And this is how therapy decisions were being made back in 2013. And so I think Howard had a couple of weeks of sitting with that problem and said, hey, listen, I'm going to resign from Amazon. I'm going to start this organization as Tidepool, as a nonprofit to help bring the broader ecosystem together and connect this diabetes data. So we really started out of that problem statement of, why what is the problem with interoperability and why can't these manufacturers talk to one another? And that was why we were created. We were created as an aggregator platform for some time. So that's the origin story. We also have another product line about Loop, and I'm happy to talk about that. But just to give you some context on how we were founded, that's a little bit of the background.
I,
That's
it's interesting. I met uh, Howard a long time ago, and I remember talking to him. I think this was right around the time, or maybe a little bit before the pre-search program that the FDA had, and where Tidepool definitely was one of the pilot companies,
Yeah.
and it always struck me. And I love this about when we find this, when someone comes into the industry from outside with other experience, as we did originally, and asks a lot of why questions. Why are we doing this way? Why is this the case? Because there's a lot of um, ways that the medical device industry has done things that are not really super efficient and are more following the letter of the law than really the spirit of the law, right? And so I really love that about Howard and about Tide Pool, that they're kind of kindred spirits in that way, in terms of, you know, what is a beta program versus a clinical trial? Why, for low risk things, are we doing things this way? Why does it have to be this expensive? If we really care about safety and effectiveness and innovation at the same time, are there other ways of doing this? So love that we're doing this webinar together, and love kind of how you guys think about it and challenge the status quo for sure.
So Kelly, if we could fast forward now 13 years, the platform does more than just connect one particular pump and one particular CGM. How big is the platform? How big is the ecosystem, I should say?
So we have two product lines. We have our Tidepool data platform, Tidepool Plus, which is essentially a platform that, was intended to solve the problems that Howard saw back in 2013, but we've grown so much since then. We pull over 100 different diabetes devices together. We are going to hit 1 million patients later this summer. We are over 950,000 patients that have been supported. Around 1,300 active monthly health systems use Tidepool to support clinical care all across the United States and outside. And we are really excited about what we can continue to push forward. I think Tidepool originally started as an aggregator to pull this data together. But, now what are the problems that we need to solve in getting data to where it needs to be for the clinician? So they aren't having to manage 7 different types of manufacturers' portals and pull that data together. And we can send data where they need it in the EHR and make it really useful and meaningful in the everyday moments.
Very good. Very good. So, Bernard, maybe you could talk a little bit about like why do we even discuss a digital ecosystem? Why
I
is
mean,
this
I think
worthy
it's
of a webinar?
yeah. I will say this: if you remember William Gibson's famous quote about the future, right? The future is here today. It is just unevenly distributed. And if you look at the sort of different parts of MedTech, right? Um, the diabetes space, in particular type 1 diabetes, is something where it's a chronic condition. It needs to be managed by by the patients themselves, with support from clinicians. It is something that is not episodic. It is chronic. It is in people's lives. So therefore, as soon as digital became pervasive in our lives with smartphones and with, you know, connected devices, insulin pumps, CGMs, it was natural to kind of connect these things together to help people do that. So it is sort of like the first place, I feel, or one of the first places in medtech where this idea of a digital ecosystem made a lot of sense in terms of making people's lives better and improving outcomes and quality of life and all of those things. So it's, the value there was very clear, and the need to actually do this was clear from the start, right? I think the same thing applies in other areas. It's just maybe it happened a little bit more slowly, but we see it in other areas where not just not just outside of the hospital where a lot of this stuff is happening, but in a more integrated way, including things that are happening inside the hospital. One of the
Yeah,
latest ones in that regard is actually the whole surgical space, right, with surgical robots and um, surgical planning and kind of the entire workflow around that and digital implants. That was moribund when, 10 years ago, and that really has taken off over the last 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that it's been interesting to see the impact of digital ecosystems from the diabetes space move outside of that into, acute care situations. I think the interesting part about maybe why diabetes led that innovation to start with was, as you mentioned, like diabetes is self-managed. It is a chronic condition where 99.5% of the time, the patient is responsible for the everyday decisions and dosing insulin if they have insulin requiring type 1 or type 2 diabetes. And what's interesting in the diabetes space is back in goodness, like 2014, 2015, this initiative called this We Are Not Waiting movement. I don't know if anyone on the webinar has heard about it, but this initiative really was born out of patients really feeling the frustrations of having to manage this condition. They had the devices, they had like incredible technology from these manufacturers where they had a great insulin pump and a great CGM, and their promise every day that one day we'll have a closed loop system or a system that takes in CGM data and automates that insulin. And, I think they were at the end of the day frustrated. And I can speak for myself, like frustrated at the lack of movement that industry had to date. And so, uh, like many others in the We Are Not Waiting community, driven kind of by this need to like better support ourselves or our kids or our partners, there was a rejection of that state of, not having an ecosystem that was working together. And so along with thousands of other folks started to use open source technology to build an automated insulin dosing system and to build data ecosystems themselves. There was no follow app to see CGM data. So there was kind of this CGM in the cloud where individuals from software backgrounds that were working outside in this software technology that was moving fast were building these things that didn't happen in the diabetes technology space. And so I think that has had a long-standing impact not only on the regulatory environment, like pushing policy forward and these frameworks for interoperability, but it's pushed the technology in diabetes care forward and subsequently across the ecosystem.
I'm as you're talking, I'm thinking about this and the era it happened in, this was started, it sounds like Typo was founded sort of around the era, probably like the iPhone 4, 5, 6, maybe.
Yeah,
Um,
right around
Thank God it didn't start today where somebody's like, I'm just gonna vibe code a closed loop insulin pump system and have it up on Monday. I just shudder to think about the risk.
Oh my
Okay,
goodness.
so a big part of what you deal with, Kellen, you've referenced this is interoperability. I'll
Yes.
ask both of you. Interoperability is used a lot in healthcare, but are we saying the same word if we're saying it in the medical device space as opposed to the clinical healthcare EHR space? Like, how do we define that? And what is the challenge for us?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you say that around EHR space. I mean, I think interoperability across all systems is trying to make it easier at the end of the day to reduce the burden on the patient or provider and get data where it needs to be. Like that's what interoperability is. And within the EHR space, there's been movement from a policy perspective that the patient has the right to direct and control how their data is used. And because of that, CMS provided a great framework to support and promote interoperability and help drive that forward within electronic health records. That same type of mandate doesn't exist in med device. It's all been about partnerships and bringing patient choice into play. And so when we talk about interoperability, we're talking about can that CGM and insulin pump talk together is there a framework for that? Are there partnerships? Are there, partnerships are really the key to unlocking interoperability and the key to unlocking that full potential of data. And are there partnerships there that make that happen? And then on a larger data ecosystem, do all of the people that need access to that data have it? And can they get it easily? And so, like when we talk about interoperability, that's really what it means. Can the provider, can the patient, can the caregiver, can they all have access to that data in a way that puts the right on the patient first? And so, I think there's been a lot of movement here around trying to do that from a policy perspective. But at the end of the day, it takes partners coming together to make it happen. Um, you know, it, I think there are lots of challenges that we see still to date because those frameworks don't exist in the same ways that they do for EHR data, for health data that's coming out of an EHR. And I think that's a real challenge to date in the United States still. But, I would love your perspective, Bernhard, on what you're seeing more broadly outside of the diabetes space, because I think, med device and
Yeah.
diabetes is one lens.
I mean, it's so, as more of a technologist, I guess, and on this, my mind went more to, again, diabetes still is the focus, kind of the risk management, guidance, how you interoperate medical devices, and then sort of abstracting from that, right? How essentially, how do you uh, maintain patient safety when you have all of these different systems that are interoperating, or you're interoperating between, and how do you keep patients safe when you're depending on some of these things? So I think the FDA in particular has what I would consider relatively simple and elegant interoperability guidance. There is other interoperability guidance. There's a giant monstrosity of a document. I forget which standard has that, but it, 500 pages and was moribund as soon as it got out there. But essentially, right, this is particular useful and spurred on, I think, because of the integrations between CGM and insulin pump and other systems to sort of create this closed loop system. So how do you ensure that when you are communicating and the insulin pump is using the data from the CGM, how do you manage the risk? What if something goes wrong? And so I think there's this the elegant solution there is really around sort of sharing risk management, sort of what are residual risks to the interoperator for your interaction with them. And then those are the things that they have to mitigate within their system, and vice versa, right? And then that also begets, how can you tell that there is an issue, right? So what's the transparency of failure modes? And if you think about that, that makes a lot of sense. It does require good coordination on that, but it is also something that is abstractable so that you can publish this for other interoperators.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about that is it applies, and that pattern can be abstracted not just to interoperating with medical devices, but it's also any other systems that you might be interoperating with, whether it's cloud services underneath, whether it is the mobile operating system and BYOD hardware, the same type of thing. You have to realize, hey, I have interfaces and dependencies, and the more that you can have that kind of, these are the residual risks, this is the transparency. If you are guided by that, it makes it much, much easier to interoperate. And then there's a data layer of that as well. We can talk about that separately. Maybe that's actually one of the more interesting ones, especially as we get into more use of agentic AI and LLMs and all of those types of things where context matters dramatically, but where we're going uh, uh, probably faster than anyone at any regulator wants us to go to. So.
Yeah, I would love to talk about that. I mean, I think FDA has been, as you mentioned, a really collaborative partner, and I think the secret to innovation in this regulated space is bringing the FDA in early as that collaborative partner. They really helped in the diabetes industry define interoperability as and try and reduce the burden for these manufacturers uh, to innovate on individual components of a system and to be able to advance an algorithm technology, for instance, without a big PMA. And so, you are the expert on your own product and figuring out where those boundaries are that you're talking about and figuring out how you interoperate. Uh, don't be afraid to elevate that your expertise and kind of provide that guidance to the agency. I think that's kind of, when we're talking about the pre-cert program and working with the FDA across interoperable med devices like Tidepool Loop, which is this interoperable automated glycemic controller. Figuring out how to ensure that those boundaries are covered, like that there's a framework for plug and play this ecosystem. And I will say we're not there yet, at least in the diabetes space, we're not there yet. But figuring out how you define those interfaces and using standards is the best way to do that. But defining those interfaces and then who is responsible for transferring those risks and making sure that appropriate verification and validation activities are done over across those interfaces. And I think defining those boundaries is really challenging for a lot of manufacturers because, you know, historically it's just been a single device. And now we're thinking about how we're interoperating with a cloud system and a different CGM technology. So you have to really unwind those frameworks for your own software development. I think that's where partners like Orthogonal can come in to help you kind of unwind that and think about these boundaries and verification and validation across them.
Yeah, I think for us the interesting thing is well of many things, right? There are if you look at sort of how software development has evolved and outside of the medical device space, right? We build incredibly complex systems that change very rapidly and that don't fail or fail very infrequently, right? Um, and there's a lot to be learned out of that if and a lot of what is done in that space, what Amazon does, what Microsoft does, what sort of cloud native thinking is whether it's on the cloud or not, it's more the cloud native thinking is really has a lot of similarities with how we think about interoperability, right? We have orthogonality between different subsystems, modularity, sort of the ability to recover when something somewhere else in the system goes wrong. And so that invariably, when something does go wrong, you have ways to elegantly recover or from an end user perspective, you don't even notice that something went wrong. And that's the same kind of residual risk, transparency, built-in mitigations, all of that is stuff that as you build out an ecosystem, you want to adopt those things. Because if you don't, and you have this big monolithic system and you don't know where your device boundaries are and how you manage the change within it, and what we've seen from companies is that if they don't do that, the more they build, the slower they are about building and about getting the next feature out, and the more effort it takes. And if they and that is very much the opposite of where where software development is going and where you have to be as you develop ecosystems in medtech.
Yeah.
So, Bernhard, first of all, you get the gold star for working the word orthogonal into a functional conversation and not just as the brand name, you know.
Well,
Um,
that's part of where how we came up with it, tangentially, but it is how we came up with it. Orthogonality is is a way of thinking about, avoiding cascading failure modes.
Absolutely.
Kelly, did you have anything to say? Because I wanted to shift, but I first wanted to give you a chance here if there was something you wanted to reflect back on.
No, no, please. What's your thought?
All right, so it's really fascinating the yin yang of the two of you because you're both fundamentally business people, but one of you came to business through technology and the other one came through product. So it's fascinating to hear the kind of perspectives there. So let's shift a little bit and talk about being a med tech company in the business of being an ecosystem player, because that is not a natural, right? It's technically it was never really easy or possible. And it's a new thing, and it's not something like CMS said 50 years ago, we're going to design reimbursement to encourage ecosystems, right? This is how we're razor and blade people, folks, you know, historically, right? Um, or whichever model you want. Or lifetime fitness people, I guess, and sometimes, but um, how do med tech companies think about being ecosystem players? Kelly, I want to acknowledge up front, I don't want to put you in a difficult position because I know you all are very much a Switzerland. You play nicely with everybody. So I would just any comments any of us make here, don't reference any med tech company specifically. It's just general patterns we've seen in the industry. With
Yeah,
with
yeah.
that.
And would love your perspective on this as well. I think, we've seen this transition a couple of different times with manufacturers. You know, and there's always those that are leading and those that are maybe lagging. And I think those folks switch spots quite frequently. At the end of the day, like, why do these ecosystem collaborations and partnerships and interoperability and, ecosystems need to be around? I mean, at the end of the day, it's a huge win for the patient. From a business perspective, though, I think it unlocks entirely new streams of value. While hardware will always be foundational, there's the real growth opportunity today is in the ecosystem. And it's not just about building great standalone device. It's like how does your device play with others? And we know, like, uh, just for instance, raw CGM data, it holds an undeniable clinical value on its own. We know that from just seeing the impact of CGM on people living with diabetes. But when it's woven into a broader ecosystem, its impact is just exponentially multiplied. So we see that across the CGM, devices that are in the market today. Like, partnering and opening up an ecosystem is the key to unlocking all of that full potential of your data. An example of this from Tidepool's perspective, and this is just a single, you know, minor component, but when you feed those insights directly into an EHR or you feed them into a population health workflow, that raw CGM data now gives clinicians a superpower. You can empower them to shift models of care, from a reactive model of care to something that's now like leveraging our Tide platform that helps clinicians identify patients that are at risk and intervene on population scale on, deteriorating glucose across hundreds and thousands of patients. And we're seeing like incredible results on that type of technology and the impact that it can have. So I think that's the definitive ROI there. It's you're elevating your hardware from just being another device to like an essential driver. In this case, like proactive modern care and changing that paradigm. And I think there are different players have different expectations of interoperability. I think everyone wants patients to have access. Um, But at the end of the day, how easy are they going to make that? how easy are they going to make that, the potential to collaborate with another organization. Those companies that are designing from interoperability at the outset, I think can reach spaces that, they can't access alone. And that's the important thing.
I think I agree with everything you said. I think maybe if we go outside of the medical device space again briefly and then dive back in, right? If you think about I don't know of our audience who are iPhone users versus Android users. Um, and if you think about sort of what switching might mean, right, uh, between those things, and that's, what do I have? I'm an iPhone user. And I can't really imagine switching because, well, I got all my stuff on. I've got Apple Music, I've got iTunes, I've got all of these things, all of these apps, all of this data, all of this information, and more kind of valuable services that I don't even think about that are just sort of keep showing up and I keep using as part of it. It would be a major, major switching cost for me to go learn the other way that it works. And what about all the data? What about all the music? What about all of my photos? All of that. The switching costs are really, really high. So I am locked into that into that ecosystem, right? Um, and so if you think about that in the med tech world, if you can build an ecosystem, and easier said than done, right? You build an ecosystem by creating value, uh, and obviously being able to capture some of that value as well, which is one of the more difficult parts in the med tech space right now, capturing the value. But if you can do that, you are much more sticky because you're, again, creating value. The switching costs are higher. Oh, this is so convenient. It actually, fulfills some needs, whether that is for a clinician, a surgeon, an endocrinologist, a patient, a parent, etc. Um, if you It is a much more powerful position to be than I just have a widget. It does this one thing. There's always going to be the next widget that comes along that does it better than what you do. But if you are really well integrated and part of an ecosystem, or you have what you're doing and you have data that is really useful for others in the ecosystem, and you have engagement with your users, that is a really powerful place to be. And diabetes, that happened. It had to happen in the space, but again, we're doing tons of work in the surgical space now, and some of that is becoming sort of table stakes. You have to have a digital ecosystem around your surgical robots and your surgical planning. And if you don't have that, it's really hard to hold on to your customers or gain new customers in that space. And then once you have an ecosystem where you have engagement, it is a lot easier to also just use that data and maybe combine it with other data, create more value in the system. It is a virtuous circle if you do that correctly.
Yeah, totally. I agree. I mean, I think that's the value of like reaching those spaces that you can't access alone without it. I wish the diabetes industry or med device had an Apple or an Android level of ecosystem play. I think some manufacturers are large enough that they have quite a lot of solutions underneath them for their, different their clinician and their caregiver and patient use cases. But we talk a lot about the ROI from like a business and workflow perspective for the clinician. And I think like we have to remember that the ultimate success measure of success there is really, are we reducing the cognitive burden for the patient? Like, are we doing that? Are we shortcutting how patients share data with their care teams? Are we integrating what you mentioned about additional data, like can we integrate diabetes data and wearable data that combines med tech technology with something that is outside of that ecosystem, helping, patients learn from their data and hopefully also, use things like metrics like sleep and exercise and women's health tracking and ultimately use that data to improve algorithms down the road. So there's value there in being able to, pull this together outside of your own silo to think about like, can we deliver more intelligent algorithms by partnering and by building this ecosystem where we're pulling in women's health data from the Aura Ring, for example. And so I think, interoperability should mean that like technology ultimately is just fading into the background and the patient and the person living with diabetes can focus on their life and pick the things that work for them for various different stages.
So,
You mentioned the Aura Aura data, and I know you guys have a partnership with Aura, uh, clients, and Aura is a client of ours and great friends of ours. Uh, and so talk to me a little bit more about that, maybe what that looked like, what you guys are hoping to gain
Yeah.
out of that, and yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're really excited about it. We announced this collaboration with Aura back in November, and this is an initiative that's supported by our partners Dexcom on the CGM side too. And the intent there is to build the largest and most comprehensive data set ever assembled in diabetes involving, a focus on women's health. So bringing together diabetes device data and integrating it with that rich physiologic data, including sleep and exercise and women's health tracking. And the goal there is really to address, the why behind it is that like despite decades of advancements in CGM technology or insulin pump technology or AID system technology, women's outcomes across type 1, type 2, gestational, etc., women face a higher risk of cardiovascular events, they face a higher risk of stroke events, and we don't have enough data to tell us why and what to do about it. Nevertheless, like building different algorithm technology that addresses those needs, we just simply don't have enough data to tell us why. And I think we are thrilled. We're going to be announcing our start to recruitment for this initiative next month, and we'll be rolling that out over the course of the next 6 months. And we're excited to create a program where individuals with diabetes can opt in through this IRB protocol and donate their device data to researchers. And so this collaboration will allow us to have data sets that support researchers in unlocking and exploring kind of the complex and interconnected patterns between diabetes device data and all of this biometric data coming in from the Aura wearable. And so we're really thrilled about that. Looking forward to sharing more next month.
So there's a bunch of one super cool. And I think this is in particular uh we know from lots of our work and what's been happening in the industry that there is now a greater focus on kind of on women's health and looking at differences between men and women, and how you maybe need to do different things for different people because of that, and that has been neglected for a very long time, I think, in the industry. So I don't think we're there yet, but there certainly has been more attention, more momentum around that, and that's awesome. Um, I think on the Aura is again a really great um, company to look at in terms of thinking about partnering uh, around data, and because again, Aura, if you haven't followed them, right? Company out of Finland, they have the Aura ring. I have one, and
Love
it is a it's a device that, it captures a lot of metabolic data. It has great sleep data, all kinds of other things that it captures. You wear it at night. You don't have to, like, once a week you have to charge it or so, and they keep growing, right? It's like, I don't know how many rings they have out there, but there are north of 6 million, I believe, at this point. Don't quote me on that. And everyone pays $10 a month for for the service, and their valuation keeps going up, and they have been very, very good about integrating with other folks. So they have the Dexcom integration. They're open to partnering and integrating with other companies. Lots of companies are doing work with them, and it's like they have engagement, they have data, and they're also kind of positioning themselves as a place where you can combine all of these things. But they're open to sort of data partnerships. You get the access to data, we get access to data. Obviously, it's the patient's data, et cetera. Um, and as we see, there is a lot of potential value uh, to some of that data and the inferences you can potentially draw, you know, early detection alerts, risk stratification, management of conditions, et cetera. And we see this in diabetes, but I think in a lot of cardiometabolic things, I know other partnerships and things that are going on with Aura in that regard. Um, that being open to that and thinking about, so I have knee surgery of some kind,
that.
and there are outcomes of that. Are there correlations with how well someone sleeps and outcomes? How can we use that data? All of that is kind of, there are things that you can potentially unlock. You don't know necessarily um, where those aha moments are, but they're there in the data. And if you are open to sharing and collaborating, it is it can be really, really valuable, especially as we move more and more away from just break fix kind of stuff, right? Uh,
I
so
think that's a great example, of the power of an open ecosystem, and outside of the MedTech space, but even with healthcare organizations and with the broader MedTech space, uh, seeing this type of interplay and understanding that there is value to be had when you can combine and reach spaces that you can't access alone. I think Ora has done a fabulous job at that. So yeah, it's great to see, and I think it's interesting to see the focus right now in the diabetes space on integration of this wearable data and how that will ultimately affect and support innovation long term.
for sure.
It's really interesting because you two talk about Aura, and it's like, well, is Aura a hardware company, a software company, a services company? It's sort of they're not just a ring, right? I mean, you say it's the Aura ring, but it's not about the ring. So let me ask this: if you're a more traditional med tech company who's already making your money historically on razors and blades or whatever, why is it in your craven self-interest for your shareholders to get engaged in ecosystems? Not because it's nice for patients, because this is the United States, right? It's not about outcomes, it's about making money. I'm somewhat joking, but why is it a good business practice to get into the ecosystem game? What's the upside and what's the peril of avoiding it at this point?
Yeah, I've got my perspective, but Bernhard, what's yours? What's your take?
Okay, I think there are a few, right? One of them is just I mean, honestly, keeping up with the Joneses is one part of it, right? There is a distinct advantage if you have a viable ecosystem, just in terms of stickiness, in terms of the risk of being commoditized, getting lowered, all of that. Um, those are compelling reasons to do that. The the working in more of the, I don't know, white space, shall we say, where there are needs that aren't being met in the razor blade kind of model. We see lots of things around uh, unlocking value by changing from being just a device company to being potentially a service company or a service enabler. I always use the example of Transmedics moving from selling a device for preserving and transporting organs to basically doing the whole process, the transplant logistics process, and buying an airline and going from a company with 3 million in revenue to being a $5 billion market cap company as a result of that. We see a lot of that kind of services where the technology enables you to have high touch where you need it, self-service where you don't need it, and the ability to scale that and capture revenue out of that. Right? Those are some of the things I see reasons to do it. I wouldn't do it just to do it because it isn't easy to do that. It is a different set of muscles than a traditional medical device company has. But if you can do it, I think your shareholders will be a lot happier and your valuation will be a lot higher if you can figure out how to make that work within your business model or generate new business models out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from a business perspective, as I mentioned, I think um, open ecosystems unlock entirely new revenue streams. And I think that the future is not just about building these standalone devices. It's thinking about how well that device plays well with others. And um, in the near term, in the immediate term, though, from why do we do this? I think reducing that workflow like friction for the clinician. You go from just being another manufacturer of an insulin pump to a partner to that clinician and in reducing that ease, reducing that burden, of like getting access to the data. And I think that's exactly how you win better formulary placements and you can lead the market. And long term, when we're talking about these data collaborations and partnerships with spaces outside of core diabetes technology ecosystem, I think you know that innovation pipeline is critical for you for long-term value, for delivering value to the patient and being able to compete. And so I think we're past the lock it down model. And I think there's policy frameworks that are advancing that will make that more clear, and hopefully incentives that are aligned for increasing that interoperability and open ecosystem and open data access and easier access for patients, um, to be able to control how and where their data is used. But um, in the meantime, like we see it. We see it on a daily basis. If you make it hard for a clinician to access your pump data, like, do you think they're going to prescribe your system? No, like if you're going to make me as a clinician log into another proprietary platform in order to get access to your data, like you have just created friction at the point of care. And so, like in the immediate term, we see that all the time with our clinicians and our users. So I think there's kind of near term opportunity and long term, opening up these new streams of value that are supported by this general fundamental goal of like bringing um, a better ecosystem to your patient population.
I think that, diabetes is a really good, I would make a really good kind of case study on kind of the open versus closed ecosystem. Because if we look, there have been different strategies, and some opening up faster than others. I know, for example, URA Dexcom partnership happened, much earlier than Abbott's engagement. Um, and if we look at the fortunes of the different folks between Tandem, Insulet, Dexcom, Abbott, and Medtronic, where there were definitely different strategies in terms of playing nicely in ecosystem versus having a closed all our own things. And you can sort of, I don't want to speak ill of anyone, but you can certainly see who's winning and who's not winning in that particular market based on that strategy. And in general, the more open ones, because you can't do everything well, and because you ultimately need to do well by your your stakeholders, your customers, and their customers. So.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
unless you have a new pump, pen, or monitor that so fundamentally leaves everything else in the dust that it makes it look like a flip phone versus the iPhone, you're going to have to do an ecosystem play because you can't force the market into your world these days
I
anymore.
mean, I think, interoperability and broader ecosystems are much more advantageous for new market entrants. You're also gaining, market awareness through working with your various ecosystem partnerships. And so I think that's a big one for those that are maybe not the older players. And thankfully, Bernhard, we're seeing, I think, a changing um of the tone across the broader ecosystem where, historically where we've seen friction in sharing data. So I'm optimistic.
I
But
mean, I think money talks, right?
money talks.
Ultimately, if you're trying to change how a business works, those are the incentives. That's the kind of stuff that actually, with the right incentives, you can see
Yep,
what works and what doesn't work. That will, that moves things. So, and that's happening in the diabetes space. So.
absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. We are down to the finish. Kelly, thank you very much for joining us for the great discussion. One piece of advice, one takeaway you'd have for somebody who's not nearly as far as long as you, and let's assume they're not in diabetes on this call, because I'm actually looking at the people on the call, and I think it's largely not a diabetes crowd.
Yeah, great. I actually have two words of advice. I would say, when you're thinking about this, as much as possible, adopt the standards, taking an interoperability approach from the outset with established standards means you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And you can as Bernhard mentioned, like from a technology perspective, you can manage those boundaries and you can allow your broader partner ecosystem to manage the rest. And I think, secondly, like partner for your blind spots. And I think that's where folks like Orthogonal come into play. We see organizations that are historically hardwired for hardware, like sensor and insulin delivery tech. They spend years trying to stand up scalable cloud infrastructure, and managing those things should be our baseline and not the bottleneck. And I think that's not our secret, not the secret sauce either. That's where you want to partner with folks that live and breathe it and can help you save your R&D dollars for what you actually do best. And so those are my two words of advice.
Excellent. Bernhard.
I I have 10 words of advice, but I'm no, I'm gonna let me see, get it. I can't do one. I'll do two. One of them is, I think, uh you is really pay attention to your data. Your data and other data is not exhaust. It is probably where a lot of your value ends up being down the line. So really be intentional as you're designing your products, whether it's a sensor, it's a pump, etc. Not just it is not purely is my device working, is it not, but how are people using it? How are people using your app? There's all kinds of data that you can be collecting. Obviously, there's a cost to collecting data. Um, but within that context, especially if it's free to collect the data, collect as much as you possibly can. You don't know right now how that data could be useful. Um, and that is also part of what you end up then bringing to the ecosystem is the data that you can potentially collect. So think about that through your design development, through your journey.
Yeah, I love that.
All right,
Attention to that,
I
right?
appreciate that.
Um,
Yeah.
and then the second one is about engagement, right? If you're playing in an ecosystem, engagement is earned, it's not assumed, right? So that means you get engagement because you're creating value. When you create engagement, you get data, and it's a virtuous circle in terms of that. So those are the two pieces of advice I would give.
Love that.
You know what? I'm going to tell my wife that you were talking about the virtues of hoarding data.
There you
I
go.
knew my time would come. All
Pulling
right.
it in, maybe not hoarding. We don't want to hoard it. We want to share it where we can.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, but hoarding's the first step to sharing. So that's what I'm going to. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you to our attendees, and great discussion. And we look forward to more. And if any of you need anything from us, please reach out directly. You could find Kelly on LinkedIn, I
And
should,
for sure. For sure.
and you can find us on email and LinkedIn. Thank you very much. Take care.
You.
Awesome. Thank you. Wonderful discussion. Loved it.
Yeah,
Bye bye
so good.
now.
Thank you all.